The strange thing about cold is that your body does not wait for danger to arrive. Long before frost can harm you, your skin begins to tighten, your muscles begin to tremble, and sleep quietly moves farther away. Tonight, a blanket may seem like the most ordinary human comfort, something so simple that we almost forget it is there. But for most of our beginning, there was no soft layer waiting in the dark, no woven warmth folded beside the body, no closed room holding yesterday's heat. There was only skin, breath, ground, fire when it could be kept alive, and other bodies close enough to matter. So why does something so simple now feel so necessary? And how did ancient humans survive cold nights before blankets? Cold does not first enter human life as snow, ice, or a distant winter landscape. It begins much closer than that. It begins on the skin, where warm blood meets cooler air, and the body quietly notices that heat is leaving. A person lying down at night may not see danger. There may be no storm, no frost on the ground, no visible sign that anything has changed. Yet the body begins to answer. Tiny blood vessels near the surface narrow. The skin tightens. The shoulders pull inward. The hands seek the warmer places near the chest. If the cooling continues, the muscles begin to tremble in small repeated movements, not because the person chooses to move, but because the body is trying to make heat by force. Long before the mind has formed the sentence, "I am cold," the older systems of the body have already begun their work. This is why cold nights before blankets were never only a problem of weather. They were a problem of being human. Our ancestors did not face the night as creatures wrapped in thick fur, with bodies naturally sealed against the air. They faced it as unusual primates, with exposed skin, long limbs, sweating bodies, and a great dependence on tools, shelter, fire, and one another. The strange fact is that many features that helped humans survive in heat and movement could become weaknesses after sunset. A body that can release heat well while walking under the sun can lose heat too easily while resting in the dark. A body built for endurance, sweating, and open landscapes must solve a different question when movement stops. Sleep asks the body to become still, but stillness makes warmth harder to defend. In the deep beginning of human life, this question returned night after night. How can a warm-blooded animal rest when the world around it keeps taking heat away? The first answer was not a blanket, because woven blankets belong to a much later human story. The first answer was the body itself, reacting minute by minute. When skin cooled, blood flow shifted inward to protect the core. When muscles shook, they burned energy to create heat. When the body curled, it reduced the surface exposed to the air. These responses were not inventions of culture. They were older than camps, older than stitched clothing, older than any name people gave to winter, but they had limits. Shivering costs energy, and ancient humans could not spend energy carelessly. Food was not guaranteed. Fat stores rose and fell with season, luck, migration, and the success of foraging or hunting. A cold night could force the body to spend precious fuel at the very time it was supposed to recover. This is where the story begins to move from comfort into survival. Modern people often think of warmth as something added from outside. A blanket, a heater, a closed room, a soft bed. Ancient warmth was more like a balance that had to be protected. Heat came from food already eaten, from the work of muscles, from the nearness of other bodies, from the memory of fire in ash, from dry ground rather than wet soil, from the difference between lying in the wind and lying behind stone. The body was the center, but the body could not solve the night alone. This matters because the earliest human problem was not simply to stay alive in an extreme blizzard. Much of the danger may have come from ordinary nights that slowly drained warmth from tired people. In open land, even a mild drop in temperature can feel severe when the body is still, hungry, damp, or exposed to wind. The beginning of humanity was shaped not only by great events, but by repeated small pressures that returned with the dark. A child cooling too quickly, an adult waking again and again, a group shifting closer to the embers, a sleeping place chosen a little more carefully, because yesterday's place was too cold. These quiet pressures do not leave dramatic marks like a spear point or a painted wall, yet they may have guided countless decisions. Before blankets, survival depended on noticing what the body was already telling them. Cold was not an enemy that waited outside the camp. It was a conversation between skin, air, ground, hunger, sleep, and the fragile warmth carried inside every human body. Night is not only a time when the sky becomes dark. For a human body, night is also the time when the sun stops lending warmth to the ground, to the air, to stones, to leaves, and to skin. During the day, even a cool landscape may feel manageable because light keeps moving through the world. The body is active. Muscles are working. Eyes are searching. Hands are gathering, carrying, shaping, or holding. But when night comes, movement slows, and the body begins to depend on the warmth it can keep rather than the warmth it can make through motion. This change matters deeply for a species like ours. Ancient humans were not simply animals caught outside after sunset. They were descendants of primates whose bodies had changed in a very unusual way. Compared with many mammals living in cold air, humans have little protective fur. Our skin can release heat efficiently. Our sweating system helps us move for long periods under warmth. These traits are powerful under the sun, across open ground, during walking, running, carrying, tracking, or searching. Yet the same body that can cool itself well during the day can become exposed when it lies still at night. The human body solved heat while moving before it fully solved cold while sleeping. This is one reason cold nights were such a serious problem before blankets. A blanket creates a quiet layer of trapped air around the body. Without it, skin meets the night more directly. The arms, legs, neck, and face become places where heat can escape. The body may curl inward, but curling is not the same as being covered. The shoulders may rise, the knees may draw closer to the chest, and the hands may hide near the belly, but the air is still there, touching the outer shape of the body. In the deep human beginning, sleep did not happen inside sealed rooms with thick walls and soft bedding. It happened near earth, stone, wood, grass, ash, or the bodies of others. Every surface mattered, because every surface changed how warmth left the body. A dry patch of ground was not the same as damp soil. A hollow partly sheltered from wind was not the same as an open ridge. A place near embers was not the same as a place where the fire had gone completely cold. Night became a test of small differences. For early humans and their relatives, the loss of body fur was not a simple weakness, because it belonged to a larger pattern of adaptation. A sweating, lightly furred body could travel, endure heat, and perhaps use daylight in ways other animals could not. But evolution rarely gives one advantage without creating another problem somewhere else. The body that became better at releasing heat also had to find ways to keep heat when release was no longer useful. The beginning of human survival was therefore not just about intelligence in the abstract. It was about a naked-skinned primate learning to arrange the world around a vulnerable body. Cold air is not always dramatic. Often it works slowly. It moves across exposed skin. It pulls warmth from fingers and toes. It settles into the stillness around a sleeping person. It is stronger when wind disturbs the thin layer of warm air near the skin. It is stronger when moisture is present because dampness carries heat away more quickly. A person who could remain warm enough during a calm, dry evening might struggle on a damp, windy night, even if the temperature itself was not extreme. This is why ancient humans could not treat night as one simple condition. There were many kinds of cold: dry cold, wet cold, windy cold, ground cold, seasonal cold, the cold after exhaustion, the cold after hunger, the cold that reaches children faster than adults. Before blankets, each kind of cold required a slightly different answer. Some answers came from the body, such as shivering and curling. Some came from place, such as sheltering behind stone or sleeping away from wet ground. Some came from fire, when fire was available. Some came from closeness, because another body is also a source of heat. The important point is that night exposed the human body's trade-off. By becoming a creature of open landscapes, endurance, sweat, hands, tools, and shared attention, humanity had moved away from the older warmth of fur and constant tree cover. The cold night reminded them of that loss. It did not announce itself as a single disaster. It returned again and again, quietly asking the same question of every camp, every sleeping group, every tired body near the edge of darkness. Without a blanket, what can still hold warmth close enough for sleep? Cold shaped human life in a quieter way than hunger, predators, or storms. Hunger leaves bones with marks of shortage. Predators leave broken remains, careful tracks, or fear that can be imagined easily. Storms change a landscape all at once. Cold is different. It can pass through a night without leaving a clear object behind. It can make a child weaker, keep an adult awake, push a group toward the same fire, or make one sleeping place better than another, and then disappear with the morning sun. Yet over many thousands of nights, this quiet pressure could shape behavior as strongly as any visible danger. Ancient humans did not need to live in permanent ice for cold to matter. They only needed to rest in bodies that lost heat when the air cooled, when the ground grew damp, when wind moved through an open camp, or when a tired person had too little energy left to shiver well. The body's core temperature must remain within a narrow range. If too much heat leaves, the body begins to protect the center by reducing warmth at the edges. Fingers become less useful. Feet feel heavy or numb. Thinking may grow slower. Sleep becomes lighter, broken, and less restoring. These effects do not have to happen dramatically to matter. A night that is only slightly too cold can still reduce rest. Less rest can mean weaker attention the next day. Weaker attention can mean poorer foraging, poorer tracking, poorer tool use, poorer care for children. This is how cold becomes evolutionary pressure. It does not have to kill every time. It only has to make some choices, some places, and some habits more survivable than others. Near the beginning of the human story, our ancestors were already living through a long exchange with climate. The world was not stable in the simple way we often imagine. Across deep time, environments shifted between warmer and cooler phases, wetter and drier regions, forests, grasslands, shorelines, highlands, and open plains. Human bodies and human behavior developed inside this changing world. The cold night was one repeating edge of that change. It asked whether a group could choose a better place to sleep. It asked whether they could keep fire alive. It asked whether they could use hides, leaves, grasses, bark, or other materials in ways that slowed the loss of warmth. It asked whether they could stay close without creating too much danger, conflict, or discomfort. In this sense, warmth was never only a physical condition. It was also a social arrangement, a memory of place, and a habit passed from one night to the next. A group that remembered which hollow stayed dry, which stones held heat, which side of a ridge avoided wind, or which season demanded a different camp was not simply being comfortable. It was protecting the body's ability to recover. Before blankets, such knowledge may have been as important as a tool held in the hand. It was practical, local, and repeated. It lived in gestures, choices, and movements rather than in written rules. The earliest humans did not need a modern understanding of heat loss to notice that damp ground made sleep worse, that wind made embers more important, or that a small child needed to be kept closer than a strong adult. Over generations, these observations could become custom. Custom could become survival. Survival could become part of the wider, human way of living. This is why cold should not be treated as a small detail beside the larger story of tools, hunting, migration, or fire. Cold touched all of those things. A tool could scrape a hide. A fire could warm a circle of ground. A camp could be placed where night air was less severe. A migration route could succeed or fail partly because bodies found ways to sleep through unfamiliar temperatures. Even the timing of movement may have mattered, because a group traveling through cooler regions had to think not only about food and water, but also about where the body could safely become still. The human being is not strong without rest. The hand that makes tools, the eye that reads tracks, the mind that remembers paths, and the parent who carries a child all depend on nights that do not drain the body too deeply. So the pressure of cold was not loud, but it was steady. It returned after labor. It returned after hunger. It returned after rain. It returned when firewood was scarce, when the ground was wet, when a child cried in the dark, when the oldest member of a group could no longer keep warm easily. Long before woven blankets, cold was already teaching humans that survival did not belong to the body alone. It belonged to the place around the body, the people near the body, and the small decisions that held warmth in the dark. Before humans had to survive cold nights in open places, their deeper ancestors belonged to warmer worlds. They were primates. and primates carry a long memory of trees, shade, fruiting branches, close bodies, and climates where the night did not always become a hard test of heat. This does not mean early primates lived without discomfort. It means their bodies were shaped in environments where warmth was more often given by the world itself. Fur mattered. Tree cover mattered. Resting above the ground mattered. A body held among branches is not exposed in the same way as a body stretched across open earth. A forest breaks the wind into smaller movements. Leaves hold moisture and shade, but they also soften sudden changes in temperature. The air inside wooded places can feel more enclosed than the air across a plain. For a small primate, the night could still be dangerous, but the problem of cold was partly softened by the shape of the habitat. The beginning of the human story changed this relationship slowly. Our ancestors did not simply step out of the trees one morning and become exposed. The change took immense time, with different hominins living in different mixtures of woodland, grassland, river edge, lake shore, and open terrain. But the direction matters. Human evolution became increasingly tied to the ground. Feet, legs, hands, hips, shoulders, and eyes all entered a new arrangement with space. A ground-living body cannot use the forest canopy in the same way. It must rest near soil, stone, dry grass, ash, or packed earth. It must face wider winds, wider skies, and colder surfaces beneath it. The movement away from constant tree cover was not only a change in posture, it was a change in the temperature of sleep. On the ground, the body meets the night from below, as well as above. Warmth can leave into the air, but it can also leave into the surface that holds the body. A branch supports only parts of an animal. The ground receives the whole resting shape. If that ground is damp, cold, or exposed, it becomes part of the cold itself. This is why the earliest human problem of warmth cannot be separated from the movement into open landscapes. To live more fully on the ground was to gain new freedoms, longer travel, shared carrying, tool use, gathering across wider areas, and eventually the control of fire. But those freedoms carried a cost after sunset. The body that could cross distance had to find a way to become still without losing too much heat. In warmer daylight, open land could offer vision and movement. At night, the same openness could become a weakness. Wind could pass over sleeping bodies without the old interruption of dense branches. The sky could clear, allowing heat to leave the ground more quickly. Dry air could cool fast after sunset. A place that seemed generous in the afternoon could become difficult before dawn. Ancient humans had to learn this difference not from theory, but from repeated nights. The memory of a cold sleeping place would matter. The memory of a sheltered one would matter even more. This slow shift from forest warmth to ground exposure helps explain why humans became so dependent on behavior. Many mammals carry their shelter on their skin. Humans increasingly carried shelter in choices. Where to lie down, what to gather beneath the body, which side of a rock to use, whether a fire could be kept, whether children should sleep in the center. These were not small details around the real story. They were the real story of surviving cold before blankets. The body had moved away from the older protection of fur and branches, but it had not become helpless. It had become a creature that needed to arrange the world. In that sense, every cold night repeated the deep history of our species. A primate body, changed for walking and endurance, lay down on the earth and had to replace the lost warmth of its ancient habitat with attention, memory, and closeness. The cold did not only ask whether humans were strong, it asked whether they could notice the shape of the land well enough to sleep inside it. The loss of thick body hair was not a mistake in human evolution. It was part of a larger exchange. A lightly covered body can release heat more easily. A sweating body can keep moving under the sun when many other animals must slow down. Long legs, open skin, and the ability to cool through sweat helped early humans and their relatives travel, search, carry, and endure in warm daylight. But every exchange has another side. When the sun disappeared, the same exposed skin that helped remove heat during the day could lose heat too quickly in the dark. This is the quiet debt of becoming human. Our ancestors did not become vulnerable because they were poorly made. They became vulnerable because their bodies were made for more than one problem, and the answer to one problem often made another problem harder. Fur is not only decoration on an animal, it is a layer of still air held near the skin. That trapped air slows heat loss. It softens the difference between the warm body and the cooler world outside. Many mammals sleep inside their own insulation. Even when the air changes, the skin beneath the fur is not touched as directly by wind or cold surfaces. Humans lost much of that protection. We kept hair in some places, but not enough to wrap the body in warmth. The bare arms, legs, chest, belly, back, neck and face all became openings through which heat could escape. In the day, this helped. At night, it created a question that could not be ignored. A body that sheds heat well must find another way to hold heat when movement stops. This problem became especially important because sleep is not an active defense. A walking person can produce heat through motion. A working person can adjust, turn, gather wood, move toward shelter, or follow the sun. A sleeping person becomes still, and stillness exposes the body's dependence on its surroundings. Before blankets, early humans could not simply lie down and assume the body would remain warm enough. Their skin needed help from place, fire, materials, and other people. The old warmth of fur had to be replaced by behavior. This is one of the deepest differences between humans and many other animals. We did not carry all our survival on the body. We moved part of survival into the world around us. A stone shelter, a dry patch of grass, a hide scraped clean, a shared sleeping circle, a fire protected from wind. These were not luxuries. They were ways of doing what fur once did automatically. Near the beginning of human life, this must have mattered most in ordinary, repeated conditions. Not every cold night was an extreme winter night. Some were simply cool enough to wake the body again and again. A light wind could remove the thin layer of warm air around the skin. Damp ground could pull heat downward. Hunger could make shivering more costly. Exhaustion could make the body slower to respond. A child, with a smaller body and less stored energy, could lose warmth faster than an adult. The lack of thick fur did not create one single danger. It created many small situations where survival depended on noticing the body's limits. This is why the ancient human body cannot be understood only by looking at strength, intelligence, or tools. It must also be understood through exposure. The exposed body was a teaching surface. It told people where the wind moved. It told them when the ground was too damp. It told them that sleeping apart was colder than sleeping close. It told them that a fire losing strength before dawn changed the whole night. These lessons were not written down, but they could be remembered in the body and carried by the group. A better sleeping place might be chosen because someone had felt the cold too deeply before. A child might be placed nearer to adults because many nights had shown that small bodies cooled quickly. A hide might be kept dry because wet covering failed when it was needed most. In this way, the loss of fur did not merely weaken humans. It pushed humans toward planning, sharing, arranging, and remembering. The cold night made the human body unfinished by itself. It needed a small world built around it. Long before blankets, ancient humans survived because they slowly learned that warmth was not something the body owned alone. It was something created between skin, shelter, ground, fire, and the people close enough to keep the night from taking too much away. Moving away from the warmer center of human origins did not happen in one simple journey. It happened slowly, unevenly, across many landscapes and many generations. Early humans and their relatives lived first within African environments that already contained great variety. Wooded places, open grasslands, river edges, lake shores, highlands, dry zones, and shifting seasonal worlds. Even there, night could become cold enough to matter. But as human groups spread into new regions, especially beyond the climates their bodies had known for so long, the problem of sleeping through the dark became more demanding. The further a lightly furred, sweating primate moved from familiar warmth, the more each night asked for knowledge that the body did not carry by itself. A body can travel into a colder land faster than evolution can grow back a coat of fur. This is one reason human survival depended so heavily on behavior. When groups moved into places with cooler seasons, higher elevations, stronger winds, or longer nights, they could not wait for the body to become a different animal. They had to use attention. They had to read land, fire, materials, and one another. The cold did not simply wait at the far north. It appeared wherever sunlight weakened, wherever dry air cooled quickly after sunset, wherever wind crossed open ground, wherever rain made clothing or bedding useless, wherever a tired group had to rest before the body was ready. In this sense, leaving the old tropical centre was not only a movement across maps, it was a movement into new kinds of night. The important change was not just lower temperature, it was unpredictability. A place could be warm in the afternoon and sharply cool before dawn. A valley could trap cold air. A ridge could catch wind. A riverbank could offer water and food, but also damp ground that pulled heat from sleeping bodies. A cave could protect from wind, yet still feel cold if the floor was bare stone. A grass shelter could reduce exposure, but fail in rain. Each new landscape changed the rules. Ancient humans did not survive by having one universal answer. They survived by adjusting many small answers to local conditions. That is why the story before blankets must include space as well as body. The same human skin that lost heat in one place could be protected in another by dry leaves, animal hide, ash-warmed ground, a stone wall, a thick stand of brush, or the warmth of a sleeping group. Human expansion made the night into a teacher with many dialects. A group moving through unfamiliar land had to learn which cold mattered most. Cold from the air, cold from the ground, cold from wetness, cold from hunger, cold after long walking, cold that struck children first, or cold that arrived quietly near dawn after everyone had stopped tending the fire. Near the beginning of our species, this knowledge was not separate from survival. To know where to sleep was to know how to remain human long enough to wake. The spread beyond older warm habitats also changed the meaning of community. In a mild climate, a person might endure a poor sleeping place and recover. In a colder or more variable place, one mistake could weaken the whole next day. A child who slept badly might need more carrying. An adult who shivered too much might have less energy for food gathering. An older person might become less able to keep pace. These effects could spread through the group because humans survived together. Cold nights therefore shaped not only individual comfort but the rhythm of movement, the care of children, the use of firewood, the choice of camp, and the memory of seasons. Before woven blankets, there was no single object that followed every body and solved every night. There was only a changing set of practices. Some could be carried, like hides or tools. Some had to be found, like dry shelter. Some had to be maintained, like fire. Some had to be shared, like body warmth. The further humans moved from the old expectation of a warm night, the more these practices mattered. The ancient body did not become less vulnerable by leaving warmth behind. It became more dependent on the world it could arrange, and in that dependence, we can see one of the deep patterns of human history. Our species survived cold not by escaping weakness, but by learning to build small circles of warmth inside landscapes that did not promise it. The ground was one of the first cold things ancient humans had to understand. It was always there beneath the body, quiet and ordinary, easy to ignore during the day. A person walking over dry earth, stone, grass, or sand feels the ground as support. It holds the feet. It receives weight. It seems passive. But at night, when the body becomes still, the ground changes its meaning. It is no longer only something beneath the body. It becomes a surface that can take warmth away. Before blankets, before raised beds, before thick mattresses, the sleeping human body met the earth very directly. The back, hips, shoulders, legs, and arms pressed downward, and wherever warm skin or thin covering touched a cooler surface, heat began to move. This movement was not dramatic. It did not look like an attack. It was simply the rule of bodies and materials. Warmth flows toward what is colder. A stone floor, damp soil, wet grass, or compacted earth could draw heat from a tired person through the long hours of rest. This meant that surviving a cold night was not only about what covered the body from above, it was also about what touched the body from below. Modern people often think of warmth as a blanket placed over the skin, but ancient warmth had a lower half. If the ground stole too much heat, a covering above might not be enough. A dry layer of leaves, grasses, reeds, bark, animal hide, or ash-softened earth could make a real difference because it slowed the direct path between body and cold surface. The earliest humans may not have explained it in those words, but they could feel the result. One place left the bones aching and the sleep broken. Another place allowed the body to stay still a little longer. One hollow held dampness. Another patch, slightly raised, stayed drier. One stone was cold before dawn. Another area near an old fire held faint warmth. These small differences became knowledge. They were part of the beginning of human shelter, even before shelter looked like a house. To survive cold nights before blankets, ancient humans had to become readers of the ground. The ground was not the same everywhere. Sand might cool quickly in the open air, yet feel different from wet clay. Dry grasses could create separation from cold soil, but wet grasses could become a channel for heat loss. Stone could protect from mud and insects, yet pull warmth away if the body lay directly on it. A cave floor could offer safety from wind, but still carry a deep cold from the rock. A forest floor could be softer, with leaves and organic matter, but if it held moisture, the softness could deceive the body. This is why the choice of sleeping place was never a small detail. It was a survival decision made through touch, memory, and repeated experience. Near the origin of human life on the ground, this lesson would have returned constantly. A primate body that had once rested more often in trees was now resting on surfaces that changed with weather, season, and place. Rain could turn a good camp into a cold one. A clear night could let heat leave the soil. A windy slope could make exposed ground colder than a sheltered hollow. The body learned these differences because it paid for mistakes with lost sleep and spent energy. Cold from the ground may have been especially dangerous because it could continue even when the air felt calm. A person might lie close to others, near embers, out of the wind, and still lose warmth downward if the surface beneath was cold and damp. This makes the ancient problem of warmth more complex than the simple image of people huddled around fire. Fire warmed air and lighted the dark, but the ground remained a separate question. Where would the body rest? What would lie between skin and earth? How dry was the place? Would children be placed on the warmer center of a shared bed of leaves or hides? Would older bodies need softer, drier layers because they could not endure the cold surface as well? These choices were not signs of luxury. They were part of how human beings extended the body beyond its own limits. The ground taught humans that warmth was built in layers, not only above, not only beside, but underneath. Before blankets, the first bed may have been less about softness than separation. A little distance from cold earth could mean deeper sleep. Deeper sleep could mean more strength at dawn. More strength at dawn could mean better movement, better attention, and better care for the group. In that quiet way, the ground beneath ancient humans was not empty background. It was one of the oldest teachers of survival. A sleeping place was more than a place to stop moving. For ancient humans, it could decide whether the body recovered through the night or spent the dark hours losing warmth, waking often, and burning energy it could not easily replace. Food, water, and tools are easy to recognize as survival needs because they have clear shapes in the hand. A sleeping place is quieter. It may look like nothing more than a patch of dry ground, a hollow behind stones, a space beneath a rock overhang, or a bed of grasses placed where the wind is weaker. Yet before blankets, such choices carried enormous meaning. A cold night did not only ask what the body could endure, it asked where the body would become still. Stillness makes a person dependent on surroundings. During the day, a human can walk away from wind, step around wet soil, lift the feet from cold mud, or warm the muscles through motion. At night, the body surrenders much of that freedom. The sleeping place must do some of the work that movement can no longer do. This is why ancient humans had to notice not only the open landscape, but the small differences inside it. A low place might seem sheltered yet collect cold air. A high place might be dry yet exposed to wind. A cave might block rain yet hold cold stone beneath the body. A stand of trees might soften the air yet trap dampness after rain. A river edge might offer food and water during the day, but become a poor resting place when moisture rose at night. The right place to sleep was rarely perfect. It was a compromise between warmth, safety, dryness, visibility, distance from animals, nearness to fuel, and nearness to the group. Near the beginning of human life on the ground, this kind of judgment may have mattered as much as any single tool. A sharp stone could cut, but it could not decide where a child should sleep. A fire could warm, but it could not remove dampness from bad soil unless people understood how to arrange the camp around it. The sleeping place connected the body to the land in a direct and practical way. If the ground was too wet, heat left downward. If the wind moved freely, heat left outward. If the group was too scattered, shared warmth weakened. If the fire was too far, its warmth faded before reaching the skin. Each mistake taught the body before it taught the mind. A person might remember a place not because it had a name, but because the night there had been restless and cold. Another place might be remembered because the body woke with more strength. These memories could become habits, and habits could become traditions. Over many generations, the repeated choice of better sleeping places helped turn landscape into knowledge. This knowledge was not abstract. It was felt in knees drawn inward, hands tucked under arms, children placed between adults, dry grass carried from one area to another, embers protected from wind, and bodies arranged where heat could gather rather than escape. Before blankets, warmth was built by position. It was built by knowing that a wall of stone could slow the wind, that a slight rise could remain drier than a hollow, that leaves beneath the body mattered most when the air cooled near dawn, that sleeping too near an exposed opening might cost more warmth than expected. The sleeping place was important because sleep itself was important. A human who could not sleep deeply enough became less able to move well, watch carefully, remember clearly, and care for others. In a small, ancient group, one tired body could affect many lives. The adult who slept poorly might gather less food. The parent who shivered through the night might carry a child with less strength. The older person who lost warmth too easily might need more care the next day. Cold did not have to kill directly to change the future of a group. It only had to reduce recovery again and again. This makes the sleeping place one of the hidden foundations of human survival. It was not simply where the day ended. It was where the body tried to become whole again before morning. Without blankets, ancient humans could not separate sleep from earth, wind, dampness, fire, and the closeness of others. To choose a sleeping place was to ask the landscape a quiet question. Can this ground hold enough warmth for a human body to return to dawn? Some of the oldest answers to cold were not large inventions. They were small decisions made in the dark. Move away from the wind, keep the body off damp ground, lie where the surface still remembers a little warmth. Before blankets, survival often depended on these quiet choices. A person could have fire nearby, other bodies close, and a place partly hidden from danger, yet still lose too much heat if the wind crossed the skin or moisture reached the body from below. Cold did not come from one direction. It came sideways through moving air. It came upward through wet soil. It came down through clear night sky when the day's warmth had gone. Ancient humans had to learn that a sleeping place was not only a location, it was a small arrangement of barriers, layers, and distances. Avoiding wind may have been one of the clearest lessons. Wind removes the thin layer of warm air that gathers near skin, fur, hide, or dry bedding. Without that layer, the body must keep warming new air again and again. Even a night that is not extremely cold can become difficult when air keeps moving. This is why a stone wall, a fallen tree, a brushy edge, a shallow hollow, or the protected side of a slope could matter. Such places did not create warmth by themselves. They helped warmth remain. In the long beginning of human life, when bodies rested closer to earth and under a more open sky, this difference could decide whether sleep became deep or broken. Avoiding dampness was just as important, and sometimes harder. Water carries heat away from the body more effectively than dry air. Damp leaves, wet grass, cold mud, and soaked hides could turn a resting place into a slow drain. A soft surface was not always a warm surface. Dryness mattered more than comfort. Ancient people would have noticed that a slightly harder place could be better if it stayed dry, while a softer hollow could become miserable after rain. They did not need modern words for conduction or evaporation to understand the pattern. The body taught them. A wet night was remembered. A dry ledge was remembered. A patch beneath overhanging rock, a place under trees that did not collect water, or a bed of gathered dry grass could become valuable because it separated living warmth from cold moisture. The third lesson was finding surfaces that held or slowed heat. Stone warmed by the day could release some warmth after sunset, though bare rock could also grow cold before dawn. Ash from an old fire might mark ground that had been changed by heat, but it had to be used carefully and with awareness. Dry plant material could trap air and create a layer beneath the body. Animal hides, when available and dry, could reduce direct contact with the ground. These were not blankets in the modern sense. They were fragments of a larger strategy. The human body did not need perfect comfort. It needed enough protection for the core to remain warm, enough rest for muscles to recover, enough sleep for the mind to meet the morning. Near the origin of human survival on the ground, enough was often the difference between weakness and strength. These small choices also show how closely human intelligence was tied to place. It was not only the intelligence of making a tool with the hand, it was the intelligence of noticing how the world behaved after sunset. Which side of the rock was calmer, which ground stayed dry after rain, which grasses could be gathered without bringing moisture into the sleeping area, which distance from the fire gave warmth without smoke or danger, which bodies needed the center of the group. Such knowledge grew slowly because it came from repeated nights, not from a single discovery. Before blankets, ancient humans survived cold by building a temporary pocket of tolerable conditions inside a larger world that did not protect them automatically. A little less wind, a little less dampness, a little more separation from the ground, a little more closeness to fire or people, none of these was a complete answer alone. Together, they formed the earliest kind of warmth humans could make. Not a single object, but a careful relationship between the body and the place where it dared to sleep. Fire changed the cold night, but not because it made humans safe all at once. It created a small circle where the rules of darkness became different for a while. Outside that circle, the air could still cool, the ground could still pull heat downward, and the wind could still move through open land. But near the flames, a human body could feel the world hesitate. Skin that had been tightening could loosen, hands could open, faces could turn toward the glow. The dark did not disappear, yet it became more negotiable. Before blankets, this mattered deeply. Fire did not wrap the body the way cloth does. It did not follow a sleeping person through every movement. It did not protect the back if the heat reached only the front. It did not warm the ground evenly unless people arranged the camp with care. Still, it gave ancient humans something no bare body could create alone, a place where heat could be gathered, guarded, and shared. The warmth of fire was not only temperature, it was a center. Around it, bodies could rest closer together, tools could be placed within reach, children could be kept near adults, wet materials could sometimes dry. A sleeping place could be chosen not only by the shape of the land, but by how heat moved from flame to skin, from ember to ground, from body to body. Near the beginning of the human story, the control of fire was not a simple switch that turned wilderness into comfort. Evidence for the use of fire reaches very far back, but the timing and regularity of controlled fire are complex, and scholars are careful because ash, charcoal, and burned bones do not always survive clearly. What matters for this story is not the fantasy that every ancient group always had a fire, but the slower truth that fire, when present and maintained, changed what cold nights could become. It turned warmth from a private biological struggle into a shared space. A person shivering alone can only burn the body's own energy. A group gathered near fire can borrow heat from wood, grass, dung, or other fuel depending on the landscape. That borrowed heat could spare the body some of its own effort. It could make sleep less broken. It could allow people to remain in places that would otherwise be harder to occupy. But fire also demanded work. It needed fuel. It needed attention. It needed placement away from wind and away from sleeping bodies close enough to burn. It produced smoke. It could die before dawn. It could attract attention. It could fail in rain. In that sense, fire was not just a comfort. It was a responsibility placed in the middle of the group. The cold night became easier only if people could keep that small sun alive. The image of ancient humans around fire is familiar, but it is often too simple. We imagine flames, faces, safety, and warmth. The deeper reality is more fragile. A fire too large consumes fuel quickly. A fire too small may not last. A fire placed badly loses heat to wind. A fire without dry material becomes smoke more than warmth. A fire not tended becomes ash, Before blankets, surviving beside fire required knowledge of fuel, weather, ground, distance, and timing. It required someone to notice when embers were fading. It required the group to decide whether to feed the flames or save fuel for later. This kind of knowledge belongs directly to the origin of human survival, because it shows how our species began to move warmth out of the body and into a shared arrangement. The body still shivered. The body still curled. The body still needed dry ground and closeness. Fire did not erase those older answers. It joined them. It made a cold night less absolute, not by defeating cold completely, but by creating a temporary zone where human attention could hold back the dark. Long before a blanket became an ordinary object, fire gave humans a different kind of covering. Not fabric over the skin, but warmth, organized in space, fragile, useful, and always in need of care. Keeping fire alive through a cold night was harder than simply making flame appear. A flame is a brief event. Warmth through the dark is a longer promise. Before blankets, this difference mattered because the body needed protection not only at sunset, when people were awake and moving, but also near the deepest part of night, when hunger, fatigue, and stillness made cold more dangerous. A fire that burned brightly for a short time could comfort the group, dry a few hands, light the sleeping place, and then fade into ash before the body needed it most. To survive cold nights, ancient humans had to learn the slower art of tending heat. They had to understand not just fire as light, but fire as duration. The night was long, and wood was not always easy to gather. In some landscapes, branches may have been available near woodland edges or river areas. In drier places, fuel could be scarce, scattered or poor. In wet weather, even plentiful wood could smoke, resist burning, or demand patient preparation. A group could not assume that warmth would continue by itself. Someone had to gather fuel before darkness made movement harder. Someone had to know which materials caught quickly and which burned slowly. Someone had to protect embers from wind. Someone had to decide whether to let flames rise high or keep a lower bed of heat that might last. These decisions were part of the ancient human relationship with cold. The fire was not just a tool, it was a living center that required care. Near the beginning of human life, this kind of care would have changed the meaning of the group. A single tired person might fall asleep and lose the fire. A group could share the burden of attention. One person waking could push fuel inward. Another could notice smoke moving toward children. Another could shift a dry branch closer to the heat before it was needed. The fire's warmth became connected to social rhythm. Sleep may not have been one deep, sealed silence for everyone at once. It may often have been lighter, broken, and shared, with people resting while others stirred, listened, watched, or adjusted the camp. This does not mean every night was carefully organized in a modern way. It means that maintaining warmth required more than owning flame. It required a pattern of awareness across time. The coldest part of night often comes not when darkness first falls, but much later, after the ground has lost more of the day's heat and the body has been still for hours. That is when a dying fire would matter most. A group that failed to preserve embers might wake into a colder world with no easy warmth left. A group that kept embers alive could rebuild heat without beginning again from nothing. This was especially important where making new fire was difficult or uncertain. Fire-making methods require skill, dry material, and time. They cannot be treated as effortless. Keeping embers may have been more reliable than creating flame anew. A small coal carried in ash, a protected hearth, or a carefully fed bed of embers could mean that warmth was not lost completely between one night and the next. Before blankets, continuity of heat was a kind of security. It allowed ancient humans to stretch warmth across hours, perhaps across mornings, perhaps across movements, from one camp to another when conditions allowed. The difficulty of keeping fire alive also reminds us that cold survival was never based on one answer. Fire could warm the front of the body while the back remained cold. It could reduce the chill of air while the ground still drained heat. It could help dry materials, but only if those materials were gathered and placed well. It could comfort children, yet smoke could irritate eyes and breathing if the camp was poorly arranged. Fire solved one problem while creating others that needed judgment. In this way, ancient humans were not simply warmed by fire. They had to learn how fire behaved inside the night. They had to learn its appetite, its weakness, its timing, and its limits. This learning belongs to the origin of human survival because it shows a mind shaped by repeated darkness. The question was not only, can we make fire? It was, can we keep warmth present when our bodies are too tired to make it themselves? A blanket holds heat quietly without asking for attention. Fire did the opposite. It gave warmth, but it asked to be fed. It gave comfort, but it could vanish. It gave a sleeping group a center, but only if that center remained alive. Long before woven covering, ancient humans survived many cold nights by guarding a fragile heat that could disappear if the group forgot it for too long. When fire became part of the sleeping place, the night itself began to gather around a center. Before that center existed, warmth was scattered inside bodies and lost into air, ground, and wind. With fire, warmth could be placed somewhere visible. People could turn toward it. They could arrange themselves by distance. They could let the youngest, weakest, or coldest bodies rest nearer to the safest warmth, while stronger adults took the outer edges. This did not make the night easy. It made the night organized. A cold camp without fire is only a group of warm bodies slowly cooling in the dark. A cold camp with fire becomes a small system. Flame, ember, smoke, fuel, shelter, ground, people, and the space between them. Long before blankets, this system may have been one of the most important ways humans survived cold nights. Fire changed sleep because it gave the group a shared reason to stay close. Not too close because flame could burn, smoke could sting, and sparks could travel. Not too far because heat fades quickly with distance. The sleeping circle had to find a balance. A person lying on one side might feel warmth on the face and chest while the back remained cooler. Another might turn during the night, not from comfort alone, but because warmth reached the body unevenly. Children might be kept where heat and adult bodies overlapped. Older people, injured people, or tired people might benefit from the center more than the edge. The arrangement around fire was not only social, it was thermal. The position of each body changed how much warmth it received and how much warmth it lost. Near the beginning of human life, this mattered because humans were not solitary sleepers by nature in the way many modern rooms make us imagine. The ancient night was not a private bedroom, it was a shared exposure. The group had to sleep inside the same weather, beside the same embers, on the same earth. Fire gave them a focal point where survival could be coordinated without speech. The body knew where to turn. The hands knew where warmth was. The group knew when the center was fading. Even silence around a fire could carry information. Smoke drifting one way, embers dimming, someone shifting closer, someone adding fuel, someone shielding a child from a cold draft. In this sense, fire became a language of the night. It did not speak in words, but it organized attention. The cold also changed how fire was valued through time. During the day, fire could cook, harden wood, change food, protect space, and assist many tasks. At night, its meaning narrowed and deepened. It became the difference between scattered heat and held heat. It allowed the group to make a small climate inside a larger climate. This small climate was never complete. Wind could break it. Rain could weaken it. Fuel shortage could shrink it. Smoke could force bodies to move. But while it lasted, it created a zone where sleeping humans were less alone against the air. Fire also linked the present night to previous days. Fuel had to be gathered before darkness. Dry material had to be protected. A hearth might be chosen where stones, soil, or a shallow depression helped contain heat. Ash from earlier burning could mark a familiar center. The sleeping place became less random because fire encouraged return, memory, and preparation. A group that knew a certain sheltered place held fire well might come back to it. A place where smoke trapped badly might be avoided. A place with enough fuel nearby might be favored in colder weather. These patterns are part of why fire belongs to the deeper history of human settlement, even before permanent homes. A hearth is not a house, but it is already a kind of anchor. It says, "Here, warmth can be held for a while." Before blankets, that anchor mattered. A blanket can move with one person. A fire draws many people toward one point. It makes warmth collective rather than private. It asks people to arrange their bodies in relation to one another. It rewards cooperation, memory, and care. The ancient human body still needed its own defences, curling inward, shivering, protecting the core, seeking dry ground. But around fire, those defences became less isolated. The group could share a heat that no single body possessed alone. Cold nights therefore helped make fire more than a tool. They made it a centre of rest, a centre of attention, and perhaps one of the earliest shapes of human togetherness in the dark. A body can be warmed by fire, but the oldest warmth a human could offer another human was not flame. It was the heat already being made inside living skin. Before blankets, before rooms, before woven cloth, the nearness of another body may have been one of the simplest and most reliable defences against a cold night. This sounds ordinary now, almost too simple to notice. But in the deep beginning of human life, sleeping close was not only affection, habit, or comfort. It was a way of reducing exposure. One body alone has a large outer surface facing the air. Several bodies close together create less exposed edge for each person. Warmth lost from one body may be partly held in the small spaces between bodies. A child pressed against an adult does not need to defend the night with its own tiny heat alone. An older person near the centre of a group may lose warmth more slowly than one lying at the edge. The cold teaches a quiet rule. The human body is vulnerable by itself, but different when placed among others. This is important because ancient humans were never only isolated survivors carrying their own private strength through the dark. They belonged to groups. They moved, ate, watched, rested, and learned in groups. Cold nights would have made that belonging physical. It was not just that people felt safer together. Their bodies could actually change the temperature of one another's sleep. A person sleeping alone in open air must keep warming the space around the skin again and again. A person sleeping beside others shares a warmer boundary. The air between bodies is less easily replaced by cold wind if the group is tucked behind shelter or arranged near embers. The warmth of the group is not perfect, and it is not equal for everyone. The outer bodies meet more air, the inner bodies receive more protection, but this unevenness itself may have shaped care. Children, infants, and weaker bodies would be placed where the group's warmth did the most good. Stronger adults might take positions where cold arrived first. Long before written rules of family or community, the cold night may have pressed people into arrangements that made care visible in the body. Near the origin of human life, this mattered because human infants are unusually dependent. They cannot walk at birth. They cannot feed themselves. They cannot regulate their world. They need carrying, feeding, protection, and warmth. A cold night before blankets would not treat a baby like a smaller adult. A small body has more surface area compared with its volume, so it can lose heat faster. It also has fewer reserves and less ability to move itself into a better position. For a group, keeping a child warm was not only kindness, it was the protection of the next generation. The warmth of bodies therefore became part of human survival in a way that tied biology to society. Cold did not simply ask whether one adult could endure discomfort. It asked whether the group could keep its most vulnerable members alive until morning. Sleeping together also reduced the burden on the body's own defences. Shivering creates heat, but it costs energy. Curling inward reduces exposed surface, but it cannot create insulation. Fire helps, but it can fade. Dry leaves or hides help, but they are not always available or dry. Another body, however, is a living source of heat, present as long as the group remains close. This may be one reason the ancient night was so different from the modern idea of private sleep. Today, many people think of sleep as something individual, separated by rooms, beds, and personal coverings. In the older human world, sleep was more likely a shared condition. The cold air touched the group. The fire warmed the group. The ground challenged the group. The success of rest depended on how bodies were placed together. This does not mean ancient sleep was always peaceful or gentle. Closed bodies can also mean discomfort, noise, smoke, movement, conflict, and broken rest. But survival rarely depends on perfect comfort. It depends on what works enough. In cold darkness, closeness worked because it turned separate heat into a common resource. It made the body less alone. Before blankets, humans did not simply survive by being tough. They survived by making warmth social. The warmth of a group mattered most where the body was smallest, weakest, or least able to defend itself. A strong adult can curl inward, turn toward fire, pull dry grass closer, or wake and move when the cold becomes too sharp. A baby cannot do these things. A young child can cry, shift, or reach, but it cannot fully understand why the night is taking warmth away. This made cold more than a private discomfort. It made cold a test of care. Before blankets, the survival of children depended on adults who could lend them warmth from the outside, not only through arms and closeness, but through the whole arrangement of the sleeping group. A baby held against the chest is not simply being carried. It is being placed near a furnace of living heat, close to breath, heartbeat, and skin. That warmth is not symbolic. It is physical. It helps the small body remain within the narrow range it needs to live. In the deep beginning of human life, this must have shaped the night in powerful ways. Human babies are born unusually helpless compared with many other mammals. They arrive with large needs and limited control. They depend on milk, touch, protection, and temperature. They cannot grow into the future unless other people keep them alive through the present. A cold night before blankets would reveal that dependence clearly. The group could not treat every sleeper the same. The smallest bodies needed the warmest places. They needed adults on both sides, a dry surface beneath them, protection from wind, and perhaps the safest distance from fire. Too far from fire, the air cooled. Too near, smoke, sparks, or heat could become dangerous. So warmth had to be balanced. It had to be given carefully. This is where the question of ancient cold becomes a question of human society. The group was not merely a collection of individuals sleeping near one another. It was an arrangement of different bodies with different risks. Infants cooled faster. Children woke more easily. Older people might struggle to produce heat. Injured or exhausted adults might not shiver strongly enough or move quickly enough. A cold night made these differences visible. The strongest body and the weakest body did not experience the same air in the same way. A place that felt tolerable to one adult could be dangerous to a child. A thin layer of dry grass that helped a grown person might not be enough for a newborn. In this way, the cold forced ancient humans to understand vulnerability long before they had any scientific words for it. The survival of the group depended on noticing who needed warmth most. Near the origin of human life, this kind of care may have been one of the quiet foundations of our species. Humans did not only survive by making tools or chasing animals or remembering paths. They survived because some bodies protected other bodies through long, ordinary nights. A mother's warmth mattered, but so did the wider group. Other adults could shelter, gather fuel, keep embers alive, arrange bedding, or make space near the center. Older children could sleep close to younger ones. A shared sleeping place could become a living structure, with heat moving through contact, breath, and nearness. The warmth of the group was not evenly distributed, but that unevenness could become meaningful. The vulnerable could be placed where the loss of heat was slowest. The stronger could face the edge. The group itself became a kind of shelter made from bodies. This does not mean ancient nights were gentle. A cold group could still be uncomfortable, restless, and afraid of losing fire before dawn. A crying child could wake others. Smoke could drift. The ground could remain hard. But survival often grows from imperfect answers repeated many times. Body warmth was one of those answers because it required no woven cloth, no permanent house, and no complicated object. It required closeness, tolerance, and attention. It required people to accept that the warmth inside one body could help preserve another. In a world before blankets, that simple fact carried enormous weight. The small child at the center of the sleeping group was not only being comforted, it was being kept connected to the future of the people around it. Every cold night that a child survived carried the group one step farther through time. And in that quiet transfer of heat, from adult skin to child skin, we can see one of the oldest forms of human survival. Not strength standing alone, but warmth given where life was most fragile. Cold has a way of making distance visible. In daylight, a few steps between people may mean nothing. One person gathers wood, another watches a child, another shapes a tool, another rests in the shade. Space can open and close without much thought. But at night, when the air cools and bodies stop moving, distance begins to cost warmth. A person lying just beyond the shared heat of others is not only farther away socially, the body is also more exposed. More skin faces the air. More warmth escapes into the dark. The ground feels larger. The wind finds more edges. Before blankets, this simple fact may have pulled ancient humans closer together again and again. The cold did not create human bonds by itself, but it made the usefulness of closeness impossible to ignore. A group that slept too loosely could lose heat at every edge. A group that gathered carefully could turn many separate bodies into one warmer shape. This was not comfort in the modern sense. It was survival arranged through nearness. The cold night taught that the human body had limits, and one of the oldest ways to soften those limits was another human body. This matters because human beings did not begin as creatures designed to live alone in sealed private spaces. Our long beginning was social, and the night made that social life physical. Around fire, behind stone, over dry grass, under hides when they were available, people had to decide where bodies belonged. The centre was not the same as the edge. The sheltered side was not the same as the windy side. The person near embers was not in the same condition as the person beyond their reach. In this arrangement, warmth became a kind of shared resource. It moved through contact, through blocked wind, through the small pockets of air held between people. The group became part of the shelter. Near the origin of human survival, this would have shaped more than sleep. It may have shaped patience, tolerance, and the habit of staying close even when closeness was uncomfortable. A sleeping group is not silent perfection. People breathe, move, cough, wake, turn, and disturb one another. Children cry. Smoke shifts. Someone's foot presses too hard. Someone needs more space. But the cold makes separation costly. It asks people to accept inconvenience because the alternative is greater exposure. In this way, cold may have quietly trained human cooperation through the body, not through a spoken lesson, not through an idea of kindness, but through the repeated experience that warmth lasted longer when people did not drift too far apart. This does not mean ancient humans were always gentle or peaceful. Small groups could have tension, fear, conflict, and competition like any human community. But cold nights placed a limit on complete separation. A person rejected to the edge of warmth would feel the decision physically. A child left without closeness would not simply be lonely, it could be endangered. An injured or exhausted adult placed too far from the group might fail to recover. The night, therefore, made care practical. It turned social position into thermal position. Who slept in the centre, who guarded the edge, who tended the fire, who kept the child close, who shared a dry layer beneath the body, these choices joined survival to relationship. Before blankets, the question of warmth could not be solved by possessions alone. There were few personal objects that could fully protect one body. Warmth had to be made collectively, from bodies, fire, shelter, and remembered places. This may be one reason the ancient human night feels so different from modern sleep. Today, a blanket allows one person to carry a private climate into bed. It separates warmth from the group. It lets comfort become individual. But before such objects were common, warmth remained tied to the people nearby. A cold night could remind every sleeper that the body was not complete by itself. It needed the group's heat, the group's attention, and the group's willingness to remain within reach. The first human answers to cold were therefore not only technical, they were social. Fire mattered. Dry ground mattered. Hides and grasses mattered. But the warmth between bodies mattered too, because it showed that survival was not just a contest between one body and the environment. It was a pattern of bodies making one another less exposed. Long before blankets, cold helped teach humans that closeness was not weakness. It was one of the oldest shelters we ever had. A covering is not always the same thing as warmth. This was one of the lessons ancient humans had to learn long before woven blankets existed. Something can hide the skin from view and still fail to hold heat. A thin branch shelter can break the shape of the wind but leave the body cold. A piece of hide can lie over the shoulders but do little if it is stiff, damp, or open at the sides. Leaves can cover a sleeping place and still become useless if they are wet. To survive cold nights, ancient humans needed more than the idea of covering. They needed layers that slowed the escape of warmth. This difference may seem small, but for a body lying still in the dark, it could matter greatly. Warmth is not held by weight alone. It is held by trapped air, dryness, thickness, and the space between the body and the colder world. A material that creates a small pocket of still air can protect better than a heavier material that presses flat and wet against the skin. This is why fur, feathers, dry grass, and loose plant fibers can matter so much in nature. They do not create heat by themselves. They keep the body's own heat from leaving too quickly. Before blankets, ancient humans had to work with what the land offered. Animal skins, fur, dry grasses, reeds, leaves, bark, moss in some environments, and other plant materials that could separate warm skin from cold air or cold ground. None of these was a modern blanket. Each had problems. Hides could be heavy, fur could become damp, leaves could rot or crush down, grasses could scatter, bark could be rough, but survival did not require perfect comfort. It required enough delay in heat loss for the body to rest. Near the beginning of human life, this difference between covering and insulating would have been learned through use, not through explanation. A hide with fur left on would feel different from bare skin. Dry grass beneath the body would feel different from damp soil. A loose layer around the shoulders would feel different from a flat piece pressed tightly against the body. The body would notice which materials allowed sleep to last longer. The group would notice which children woke cold, which elders needed more layers, which materials failed after rain, and which ones could be dried near fire. This knowledge belonged directly to the ancient problem of cold, because it turned the landscape into a store of possible warmth. The animal hunted for food might also provide hide. The dry grass gathered from a sheltered patch might become bedding. Leaves collected from higher ground might keep a sleeping body off damp earth. A scraped skin might become more useful after it was softened, dried, or shaped around the body. These were not simple objects. They were relationships between material, weather, body, and fire. A covering that worked one night might fail the next if rain soaked it. A hide useful in cold air might become difficult if it trapped too much moisture. A bed of plant material might need to be replaced because crushed fibers no longer held air. Before woven textiles, warmth was temporary and labor-intensive. It had to be gathered, dried, carried, repaired, replaced, and arranged. This made cold survival a daily practice rather than a single invention. The early human body had already lost much of the natural insulation that many mammals carry on their own skin. Animal hides and plant layers partly borrowed that lost protection from the world. They were ways of giving the body a second environment, not yet clothing in the full modern sense, not yet bedding in the familiar sense, but something between the body and exposure. This is also why the first useful coverings were probably valued less for softness than for function. A rough, dry layer could be better than a smooth, damp one. A patchy hide could be better than bare ground. A pile of grasses beneath the hips and shoulders could matter more than a thin covering over the chest. The ancient question was not, does this feel pleasant? It was, does this slow the night from taking too much heat? In that question, we see the careful intelligence of people living before blankets. They did not simply endure cold with bare strength. They tested the world through touch. They learned that some materials only covered the body, while others helped the body keep its living warmth a little longer. The layer beneath the body may have mattered more than the layer above it. This feels strange to a modern mind, because many people imagine warmth as something pulled over the chest and shoulders. A blanket covers from above, so we think of protection as a roof over the skin. But a sleeping body loses heat in more than one direction. In a cold night before blankets, the earth beneath a person could become the most constant thief of warmth. Air moves and changes, fire rises and fades, bodies shift closer or farther away, but the ground remains in contact for hours. The hips, back, legs, shodnite press into it. If that surface is cold, damp, or hard, the body must keep paying heat downward, quietly, without relief. This is why a layer underneath could be a serious survival tool, even if it did not look impressive. Dry grass, leaves, reeds, bark, animal hide, or a mat of plant material could create separation between warm flesh and cold earth. The value of such a layer was not only softness. Softness may have helped the body rest, but insulation was the deeper gift. A loose, dry layer holds tiny spaces of air. Those spaces slow the movement of heat away from the body. They make the contact between skin and ground less direct. They allow the warmth made by food, muscle, and living blood to remain a little longer where it is needed. Near the beginning of human life on the ground, this lesson would have been learned through repeated nights. A person lying directly on damp soil would wake colder. A child placed on dry plant material might sleep longer. A group resting on bare stone might feel the cold rising before dawn. A group that prepared the ground first might find that the same air, the same fire, and the same night became easier to survive. The ground layer also mattered because the body's weight compresses whatever lies beneath it. A thin covering over the body may still trap air if it remains loose, but material under the body is pressed flat. This means the best bedding had to be thick enough, dry enough, and arranged well enough to keep some separation even under weight. Crushed wet leaves would not work like dry leaves. Flat cold hide would not work like fur with air held in it. A few scattered grasses might shift aside, while a deeper bed could stay beneath the hips and shoulders. Ancient humans did not need scientific language to notice these differences. The body would have made the lesson clear. One surface allowed sleep, another surface stole it. In this way, the earliest bedding was not merely a comfort object, it was a way of changing the thermal relationship between the human body and the earth. This connects directly to the human origin story because our ancestors were ground sleepers before they were builders of beds. Once the body left the older protection of trees and thick fur, the surface below became part of survival. The first human sleeping places were not designed for beauty. They were chosen and arranged around what the body could endure. A dry raised patch, a floor of leaves under a rock overhang, grass gathered into a shallow hollow, a hide placed fur side toward the sleeper, ash-warmed soil near an old fire. Each of these could reduce the cost of night in a different way. None was perfect. Plant bedding could carry insects. Hides could become wet. Grass could need replacing. Leaves could decay. But the fact that something was temporary did not make it unimportant. Before blankets, warmth had to be rebuilt again and again. It was not a permanent possession. It was an arrangement made for one night, then renewed for the next. The layer beneath the body also shaped social care. The best place on the bedding might be given to an infant, a tired mother, an older person, or someone weakened by illness or injury. A group might add more dry material where children slept. People might choose a sleeping site partly because bedding material was nearby. Fire could dry plant layers or hides, making them useful again. The sleeping ground became a shared project. It was not simply where individuals dropped from exhaustion. It was a carefully altered surface where bodies could stop moving without losing too much heat. This is why the story of ancient cold cannot be told only by looking at what covered the shoulders. The underside of warmth was just as important. Long before a woven blanket could fold over the body, ancient humans were already learning that survival began with a question so quiet it is easy to miss. What lies between the warm body and the cold earth? The materials ancient humans used against cold were rarely permanent. They were gathered from the place itself, shaped by hand, used for a night or a season, then lost, broken, burned, rotted, or left behind. This is one reason the history of warmth before blankets is hard to see. Stone tools can last for hundreds of thousands of years. Bones can survive under the right conditions. Charcoal can remain as a dark memory of fire. But dry grass, leaves, bark, reeds, moss, and untreated hides often vanish. They return to soil. They leave only faint traces, if any traces remain at all. Yet the absence of these materials in the ground does not mean they were absent from life. In fact, they may have been central to ordinary survival. Before woven textiles, the sleeping place was probably built from things that decay. A layer of dry grasses could lift the body away from cold soil. Leaves could fill hollows and soften contact with the earth. Bark or branches could create a rough barrier against dampness. Animal hides, when available, could cover, wrap, or lie beneath the body. Fur could trap air. Reeds could make a mat-like surface. Ash and warmed ground near fire could change the temperature of a resting place for a while. None of these materials was a blanket in the modern sense. They did not arrive clean, soft, rectangular, and ready. They had to be chosen, carried, dried, shaken, scraped, softened, folded, layered, or replaced. Warmth was not bought or stored in a closet. It was made from the landscape every time the night demanded it. Near the beginning of human life, this would have tied survival to close observation. Not all leaves were useful. Not all grasses stayed dry. Not every hide kept warmth if it became wet or stiff. A material that worked in one season might fail in another. A group sleeping near a river might have reeds and dampness at the same time. A group in open grassland might have fuel and bedding but little shelter from wind. A group near woodland might have leaves and branches but also moisture. Each place offered a different set of answers and problems. Ancient humans had to learn which materials could slow heat loss without creating new discomfort or danger. A thick pile of dry plant matter could insulate, but it might also attract insects. A hide could protect from wind, but if it was not dried or treated well, it could rot or smell, and if it became soaked, it could lose much of its value. Bark could separate the body from damp ground, but it might be hard and uneven. The useful sleeping place was therefore not a single object. It was a layered compromise. The body needed dryness, trapped air, some softness, some protection from wind, some distance from the cold surface below, and enough freedom to breathe, turn, and rest. These rough materials also show how intelligence worked before complex technology. It was not always dramatic. It was the intelligence of noticing that dry grass from under a sheltering branch worked better than grass collected from a low, wet hollow. It was the intelligence of placing a hide beneath a child rather than only over an adult's shoulders. It was the intelligence of drying materials near fire before night, or saving a useful skin rather than leaving it behind after an animal was eaten. This kind of knowledge rarely becomes famous, but without it, a cold night could undo the strength gained during the day. Human survival began not only with the spear, the stone edge, or the flame. It also began with the quiet ability to gather humble materials and turn them into a small, temporary boundary between living warmth and the cold world. Before blankets, warmth was a construction made from whatever could be found. A bed of grass, a skin with fur still holding air, leaves kept dry under stone, a windbreak of branches, a place where embers had softened the ground. These were fragile answers, but fragile does not mean unimportant. Many human answers to cold were fragile. Fire could die. Dry bedding could become wet. A shelter could fail in wind. A group could wake and rearrange itself before dawn. Yet each fragile answer delayed heat loss a little. And in the long human beginning, a little delay could mean enough sleep, enough strength, enough care for a child, enough life to meet the morning. A cave can look like a complete answer to cold, but for ancient humans it was never that simple. Stone walls can block wind. A roof of rock can stop rain. A deep hollow can soften the sharp changes between afternoon warmth and night air. Compared with sleeping fully exposed beneath an open sky, such a place could feel like mercy. Yet a cave is not a warm room. It has no door that closes, no soft floor waiting for the body, no stored heat unless fire, people, animals, or the day's warmth have changed it. The stone itself can be cold. The ground inside may be damp. Air can move through cracks and openings. Smoke from fire can gather if the space is poorly shaped. A cave can protect one side of the body while the floor continues to take heat from below. This is why caves and rock shelters must be understood carefully. They were not magical shelters. They were places where several dangers could be reduced, and in a cold night before blankets, reducing danger was often enough. For a lightly furred human body, even a small reduction in wind could matter. Wind makes cold more aggressive because it removes the thin layer of warmer air near the skin. A rock wall does not need to be warm to help. It only needs to slow the movement of air. A roof does not need to be soft to help. It only needs to keep rain from soaking bedding, hides, skin, and fuel. Dryness can be as valuable as heat because dampness carries warmth away so quickly. Near the beginning of human life on the ground, places like caves, overhangs, and shallow rock shelters would have offered something the open landscape did not always give: a more stable edge between the body and the night. Stability mattered. Outside, the temperature could fall quickly after sunset, especially under a clear sky. Wind could change direction. Rain could turn dry bedding into a cold weight. Inside a sheltered space, change could be slower. The air might still be cold, but less restless. The ground might still need leaves, grass, hides, or branches. But at least those materials might stay drier. Fire might still need tending, but flame and embers could be less exposed to wind. A group might sleep closer together because the walls guided the shape of the sleeping place. In this sense, a cave did not replace fire, bedding, or body warmth. It made those other answers work better. The ancient human problem was rarely solved by one thing. It was solved by combinations: stone above, dry material below, fire placed carefully, bodies near one another, children protected from the edge, fuel kept out of rain, smoke allowed to escape. A cave could become useful only when people understood how to live with its limits. Some caves may have been too wet, too deep, too smoky, too dangerous, or already used by animals. Some openings may have faced the wrong wind. Some floors may have been bare rock that stole warmth before dawn. A good shelter was not simply any hole in stone. It was a place that fit the body's needs well enough for rest. This brings the story back to the earliest human condition. Our ancestors were not born with houses. They had to borrow shelter from the shape of the earth before they could build it more fully with their own hands. A cliff face, a shallow cave, a rock overhang, a protected hollow, these were not passive scenery. They were part of how the landscape could be turned into a temporary extension of the body. The wall became a windbreak. The roof became a dry zone. The floor became a surface to be changed with bedding. The entrance became a place to manage fire, smoke, light, and watchfulness. Before blankets, to choose such a shelter was to decide how the night would touch the body. It would still touch it. Cold could still enter, but it might enter more slowly, less directly, with fewer paths to steal warmth at once. That slower loss could mean more sleep. More sleep could mean stronger hands in the morning, clearer attention, and better care for the young. A cave was not comfort as modern people imagine it. It was a rough negotiation with stone. Yet for ancient humans facing cold without woven warmth, even rough stone could become a kind of protection when it stood between living bodies and the moving night. Rock shelters, overhangs, bushes, fallen trees, and the edges of forests were not homes in the modern sense, but they could become tools against the cold. They did not make warmth. They changed how quickly warmth was lost. This was often the most important difference before blankets. A human body lying in open air is exposed to many paths of cooling at once. Wind moves across the skin, dampness rises from the ground, night air settles around the body. A clear sky lets heat escape from surfaces that had held the day, but a body lying behind a stone face, beneath a ledge, beside a thick patch of brush, or within the broken shelter of trees meets the night differently. The cold is still present, but it has fewer straight roads into the body. A rock overhang could keep rain from soaking bedding and fuel. A shallow hollow could reduce the force of wind. A cluster of bushes could trap calmer air near the ground. The edge of a forest could soften exposure without fully closing the world. These places were not comfortable by themselves. Their value came from how they helped other answers work better. A dry bed of grass is more useful under a ledge than in falling rain. A small fire is more useful where wind cannot tear heat away immediately. A group of bodies is warmer when cold air does not pass freely between them. In the deep beginning of human survival, this kind of shelter was a way of borrowing shape from the land. Before people could build walls wherever they wanted, they had to notice where the world had already made partial walls. A cliff, a boulder, a wind-bent tree, a bank of earth, a dense thicket, or a fold in the ground could become part of the sleeping system. The body did not need a perfect house. It needed a place where the loss of heat slowed enough for sleep to continue. This is why natural shelters should be understood not as background scenery, but as part of the ancient technology of warmth. A stone does not look like a tool when it remains in the ground. Yet if it blocks wind from a sleeping child, it is working like a tool. A bush does not look like a roof. Yet if it breaks the movement of air and keeps frost or dew from settling as heavily. It changes the night. A forest edge does not close like a door, yet it changes sound, light, wind, and sometimes temperature. Ancient humans were not only makers of objects, they were readers of usable spaces. They learned to see protection where a modern person might see only landscape. This mattered especially because cold survival depended on combinations. A rock shelter with bare cold stone beneath the body could still be harsh. A bushy hollow that trapped damp air could become worse than open dry ground. A forest floor could provide leaves and cover, yet hold moisture after rain. A place near water could offer life during the day and chill during the night. No shelter was automatically good. Each had to be judged by wind, dryness, fuel, animal presence, visibility, and the needs of the group. Near the origin of human life on the ground, the sleeping place was therefore an act of interpretation. People had to ask without words. Where does the wind go? Where does water settle? Where will smoke drift? Where can bodies gather? Where will the child be warmest? Where can embers survive until morning? These questions tied human warmth to memory. A place that had worked before would be remembered. A place that had failed might be avoided. A group crossing familiar land could carry not only tools and fire, but a map of shelter in the mind. A dry overhang near a slope, a stand of trees that blocked the night wind, a patch of grass that stayed usable, a stone wall that made a small, calm space in a large, cold world. Before blankets, the landscape itself had to be folded around the body. Not fully, never perfectly, but enough. The shelter of stone, brush, and forest edge gave humans something between exposure and home. It made the night less open. It gave fire a chance to last, bedding a chance to stay dry, and living bodies a chance to share warmth without the cold taking it away too quickly. A shelter was never only a roof. For ancient humans facing cold nights before blankets, shelter was a relationship between land, fire, ground, and bodies. A rock overhang could stop rain, but if the floor beneath it was cold and bare, sleep could still drain warmth away. A fire could warm the air, but if wind pushed smoke into the sleeping place, people might have to move farther from the heat. A group could lie close together, but if they settled in damp soil, the earth could take more warmth than their bodies could share. Nothing worked alone. This is one reason the ancient night required such careful judgment. The body needed several kinds of protection at the same time. Less wind, less wetness, less contact with cold ground, enough fire to change the air, enough closeness to share heat, and enough safety to let sleep come. A cave, a hollow, or a thicket became useful only when it joined these needs together. Before blankets, the sleeping place had to behave almost like a temporary body around the human body. It needed a back against the wind, a dry skin beneath, a warm center, and living warmth gathered near the most fragile people. The first form of shelter was not a house with clear walls. It was a small improvement in the way the night touched the skin. Near the beginning of human life, this improvement could be made from what already existed. A stone face, a slope, a pile of dry leaves, a circle of bodies, embers held in ash, branches placed to break air movement. The difference between exposure and survival often lived in these combinations. A cold landscape might still be cold, but a body inside a better arrangement lost heat more slowly. That slower loss mattered. It gave the body time to sleep without shivering constantly. It allowed children to remain warm with less effort. It let adults wake with more strength. When we imagine ancient humans surviving cold, it is easy to search for one invention that solved the problem. Fire. Fur. A cave. A hide. But the real answer was usually not one thing. It was a system made from imperfect things. Fire gave heat, but needed fuel. Hides held warmth, but needed to stay dry. Plant bedding separated the body from ground, but needed thickness and replacement. Stone blocked wind, but did not soften the floor. Other bodies shared warmth, but needed arrangement and tolerance. Each answer had a weakness. Together, they could cover one another's weaknesses enough for the night to pass. This is the deeper meaning of shelter in early human history. It was not a finished structure. It was a living arrangement. People had to place the fire where it could warm but not burn. They had to keep bedding dry enough to trap air. They had to choose whether the group should sleep deeper inside a shelter or closer to the entrance where smoke could escape. They had to keep children away from cold edges. They had to know when an overhang was useful and when it was too damp, too smoky, or too exposed. These choices were not separate from human intelligence. They were intelligence at the level of rest. A hand that could shape a stone tool also belonged to a body that needed to sleep through cold. A mind that could remember a path also had to remember which place held warmth after sunset. A group that could share food also had to share the safer center of the sleeping space. In this way, cold nights may have helped train human beings to think in relationships rather than isolated objects. The question was not simply, do we have fire? It was, where is the fire? Where is the wind? Where is the dry ground? Where are the children? Where will smoke go? Where can heat remain longest? This kind of thinking is quiet, but it is deeply human. It turns a landscape into a set of possibilities. It turns a group into a shelter. It turns fragile materials into a short-lived but meaningful defense against the dark. Long before blankets, ancient humans survived cold nights because they learned that warmth was not found in one place. It had to be assembled, protected, shared, and renewed until morning. Clothing did not begin as fashion, and it did not begin as a neat layer of fabric shaped for the body. Long before woven blankets, long before cloth could be folded over a sleeping person, humans needed something like a second skin. The body had already become too exposed to meet cold night air without help. Fire could warm a circle, a shelter could slow wind, dry grass could lift the body from cold ground. Other people could share warmth, but the body still moved through the world with its own bare surface, and that surface kept asking for protection. A covering that could stay with a person while walking, resting, carrying, or sleeping changed the relationship between skin and cold. It did not solve everything, but it made the human body less dependent on one fixed place. This is why the first useful clothing was probably not a single invention, but a slow gathering of practices: wrapping, tying, scraping hides, softening skins, using fur, binding materials around the shoulders or waist, and learning which coverings helped in wind, rain, or night cold. The need came before the perfect object. A person who had animal hide over the shoulders was not wearing clothing in the modern sense, but the body would still feel the difference. Wind touched the skin less directly. Warm air stayed closer. Rain or dew might be slowed for a time. A child could be wrapped. A tired adult could sleep with one more layer between living warmth and the dark. Near the beginning of human expansion into cooler environments, this mattered because people could not always remain beside one fire or inside one shelter. They moved through landscapes. They gathered fuel, searched for food, carried children, crossed open ground, and returned to sleeping places after the air had changed. A portable layer meant warmth could travel with the body. It was not as steady as a blanket, not as sealed as a house, and not as automatic as fur, but it marked an important shift. Humans were beginning to carry fragments of shelter on themselves. Making such a layer useful required more than throwing a skin over the back. Fresh animal skin is heavy, wet, stiff, and temporary if it is not treated. Hides need scraping, drying, softening, and sometimes smoke or fat or other methods to make them more usable. Fur can trap air well, but only if it remains in a condition that holds its structure. Plant fibers can bind or tie, but they must be chosen and worked. A covering that falls open in the wind may protect poorly. A covering that becomes soaked may pull heat away instead of keeping it close. Ancient humans therefore had to learn the difference between having material and having usable protection. This knowledge rarely leaves simple traces because organic materials disappear easily. Yet the need itself is written into the human situation. A lightly furred primate moving into cooler nights had to replace lost insulation with behavior, and clothing was one of the ways behavior became attached to the body. This also changed sleep. A covering used by day could become part of warmth by night. A hide wrapped around the shoulders near a fire could later lie over a sleeping person. A skin used to carry or protect something might become bedding beneath a child. A fur layer might shield the body from wind at the edge of a shelter. The same object could move between roles because ancient survival did not separate clothing, bedding, shelter, and tool as sharply as modern life does. Everything useful had to answer more than one need. In a cold night before blankets, a skin was not merely clothing. It could be roof, wall, bed, wrap, and memory of an animal's own insulation. The origin of clothing, therefore, belongs directly to the question of how humans survived cold nights. It shows that warmth was slowly becoming portable. The body was no longer only protected by where it slept, who slept nearby, or whether the fire survived. It could begin to carry a partial answer into the dark, but the answer remained fragile. A hide could tear, a tie could loosen, a layer could become wet. A covering could protect one person while another still needed warmth. Clothing did not remove the old dependence on fire, ground, shelter, and group care. It joined them, adding one more thin boundary between human skin and a world that cooled after sunset. A small hole through bone, a sharpened point of stone, a strip of hide pulled tight around the body. These may seem like modest things beside fire or shelter. Yet in the cold history of humans, such small details could change the night. A covering that simply rests on the shoulders is useful only while the body remains still and the air remains calm. But a covering that can be pierced, tied, wrapped, fastened, or shaped begins to behave differently. It can stay closer to the skin. It can close gaps where wind enters. It can hold fur or hide in place while a person walks, carries, or sleeps. Before blankets, this kind of fastening mattered because warmth often escaped through openings. A hide over the back might warm the spine, while cold air moved under the sides. A wrap around the chest might help, but if it loosened during sleep, the body would wake exposed again. A tied layer did not need to be beautiful. It needed to remain near enough to slow the night from entering. The archaeological record gives only a partial view of this story. Stone tools survive more easily than leather, plant fibers, sinew, or fur. Needles made from bone, awls, scrapers, and cutting tools can suggest the working of hides and the making of fitted coverings, but the earliest soft materials themselves often disappear. This means the history of clothing is partly visible through the tools that touched it. A scraper could clean a hide, a sharp point could make holes. A needle could pull thread or sinew through material, a cord could bind a covering around the body. These small technologies show a shift from using material as found to reshaping material around human vulnerability. Near the beginning of human life in colder places, this shift mattered because cold finds weakness in loose edges. The human body is not a flat shape. It bends at the shoulders, hips, knees, elbows, neck, and waist. To keep warmth, a covering must deal with movement. It must allow a person to walk and still remain useful. It must allow sleep and not slide away too easily. It must protect without trapping so much dampness that the body becomes colder later. This made clothing a careful compromise. Too loose, and wind entered. Too tight, and movement became hard or moisture collected. Too heavy, and the body spent energy carrying it. Too thin, and it gave little protection. Ancient humans did not solve this all at once. They likely learned through repeated use, through the feel of cold air at the seams, through the failure of wet hides, through the difference between fur facing inward or outward, through the way a child stayed warmer when wrapped more securely. The importance of needles, awls, cords, and ties is that they allowed warmth to become more fitted to the human form. A hide could become more than a flat sheet. It could become a sleeve-like wrap, a tied cloak, a foot covering, a sleeping layer, or a carrying wrap for a child. Each small improvement reduced dependence on perfect weather and perfect shelter. A person could move farther from fire. A group could sleep in a colder place with slightly less risk. A child could be carried through wind with more protection. An exhausted adult could keep a layer close through broken sleep. These are quiet changes, but human survival often grows from quiet changes. The first true revolution was not that people suddenly owned clothing like modern clothing. It was that they began to make the outside world fit the body more closely. In that sense, a pierced hide or a tied skin was part of the same ancient answer as the hearth and the sleeping place. It took warmth, which was always trying to escape, and held it nearer to the skin for a little longer. Before blankets, this was enough to matter. A bone needle, a strip of sinew, a softened hide, and a careful knot could become the difference between a covering that slipped away in the dark and a layer that stayed with the body until morning. A covering worn during the day did not stop being useful when the body lay down at night. In a world before blankets, the same hide, fur, wrap, or tied skin could follow a person from movement into sleep. This made early clothing different from the clothing many people know now. It was not always a separate category from bedding. It was part of a small collection of warm things that had to serve many purposes. A skin might protect the shoulders while walking through wind, then become a layer over the chest near the fire. A fur piece might be worn around the body during a cold morning, then placed beneath a child after sunset. A tied wrap might keep warmth close during rest, even if the sleeping place itself was poor. The boundary between clothing and blanket was not yet firm. What mattered was whether the material could hold warm air near living skin, stay dry enough to work, and remain close through the long hours when the body was still. This shift from daytime covering to nighttime warmth was important because cold did not wait politely for sleep. It began before lying down and often continued after waking. A person who became chilled while gathering fuel, crossing open ground, or sitting near a weak fire would enter sleep already at a disadvantage. The body would need to spend more energy recovering warmth. A portable layer could reduce that loss before the night fully arrived. Near the beginning of human life in colder and more variable places, this mattered because warmth had to be managed across time, not only at the moment of sleep. The body needed protection while moving, resting, feeding a child, preparing a fire, and settling onto the ground. Early clothing helped connect these moments. It allowed some warmth to remain with the person between the open landscape and the sleeping place, but it also carried problems. A layer that helped during movement could become damp with sweat. A damp covering could become dangerous when the body stopped moving. A hide that blocked wind during the day might feel heavy or stiff at night. A wrap that protected the chest might leave the feet exposed. Ancient humans had to learn when a covering should be worn, when it should be dried, when it should be used beneath the body, and when it should be shared with someone more vulnerable. These are quiet decisions, but before blankets they were part of survival. Clothing was not only about the individual body, it also entered the sleeping arrangement of the group. A child could be wrapped closer to an adult. A tired person could keep a hide around the shoulders while lying near embers. A fur layer could be placed where the ground was coldest. Several small coverings might be combined with grass, leaves, and body warmth to make one sleeping space more tolerable. The material did not need to be large enough to cover everyone fully. It could still matter if it protected the weakest point, the back against stone, the child at the center, the side facing wind, the person farthest from the fire. This is why the story of clothing belongs directly to the question of cold nights. It made warmth more flexible. Fire stayed in one place. A rock shelter stayed where the land had shaped it. Dry bedding could be gathered and arranged, but it did not easily follow the body across distance. Clothing moved with the skin. It was a small portable shelter, incomplete but valuable. It showed that humans were learning to carry parts of the sleeping place with them. The ancient body still needed fire, ground knowledge, group closeness, and shelter. Yet a fitted or wrapped layer changed how exposed that body was before reaching those other protections. In a world without blankets, every layer had to work harder. A piece of hide was not merely worn. It could be carried, slept in, shared, dried, repaired, and remembered. It could gather the warmth of the day, the smoke of the fire, the smell of the animal, and the history of many nights. Long before woven bedding softened human sleep, early coverings helped make the body less naked before the dark. They did not end the cold. They gave people one more way to keep the cold from arriving all at once. A cold night does not touch every body in the same way. This is one of the most important truths in the ancient story of warmth. A grown adult with strong muscles, more body mass, and the ability to wake, move, gather fuel, or shift closer to fire has more ways to answer the cold. A newborn does not. A small child does not. A baby lying in the dark has very little control over the distance between its skin and the night. It cannot choose a drier place. It cannot pull a hide tighter around its own body. It cannot move closer to embers without help. It cannot understand why the air has changed. Its survival depends on other bodies noticing what it cannot yet solve. Before blankets, This made cold not only a problem of shelter or fire, but a problem of generations. If the young could not be kept warm, the group's future became fragile. Human infants are born unusually dependent. They need feeding, carrying, cleaning, protection, and warmth for a long time. Their bodies are small, and small bodies lose heat quickly because they have more surface area compared with the warmth stored inside. A baby does not have the same reserves as an adult. It cannot shiver with the same strength for long. It cannot curl into the best posture and keep that posture through the night without help. Even a cool night that an adult might survive with discomfort could become dangerous for an infant if dampness, wind, hunger, or exhaustion joined together. This is why ancient warmth had to be organized around vulnerability. The cold asked the group a simple but serious question: who needs the center, and who can endure the edge? Near the beginning of human life, this question would have returned again and again. A sleeping group could not arrange itself only by convenience. The warmest place might be near an adult chest, between bodies, above the driest bedding, away from the entrance of a shelter, near enough to fire to benefit, but not so near that smoke, sparks, or heat became dangerous. A baby might be wrapped in hide, held close, or placed where several forms of warmth overlapped. A young child might sleep between adults, not only for comfort, but because the human body itself can become a living wall against the cold. The group's warmth had layers: ground material below, fire nearby, bodies around, covering above, and attention moving quietly through the night. The smaller the body, the more those layers mattered. This is where the ancient problem of cold becomes a deeper human story. The survival of babies could not be separated from cooperation. A mother's body was central, but one body alone could not solve every night. Someone had to keep fuel dry. Someone had to help choose the sleeping place. Someone had to make or maintain coverings. Someone had to keep older children close enough, but not crowd the smallest ones too dangerously. Someone had to wake when fire faded or when a child cried from cold. These actions may not leave clear marks in the archaeological ground. They do not look like monuments. Yet they may have mattered as much as any tool, because every generation had to pass through infancy before it could become the next group of walkers, makers, gatherers, and memory keepers. Cold also exposed differences beyond infancy. Older people may have lost warmth more easily. Injured adults may have struggled to move or shiver. A person weakened by hunger or illness may have needed a warmer place than a healthy adult. The night sorted bodies by need, not by pride. Before blankets, a group that ignored those differences risked losing its most vulnerable members. A group that noticed them could turn care into survival. This does not mean ancient people had modern ideas about childhood, medicine, or elder care. It means they lived close enough to the body's limits to see that some people needed more protection than others. A child who survived many cold nights carried more than its own life into the future. It carried the success of many small acts. A dry layer placed beneath it, a warmer body beside it, a fire kept alive a little longer, a shelter chosen a little more carefully, an adult waking before the cold went too far. Long before blankets, human warmth was not distributed evenly by objects. It had to be given, placed, shared, and guarded. In the small, sleeping body of a child, the whole question of ancient cold becomes clear. Survival was never only about how much cold one person could endure, but about how much warmth a group could protect for those who could not protect themselves. Cold reveals dependence in a way few other forces do. A hungry person may search for food. A thirsty person may move toward water. A frightened person may run, hide, or fight. But a very small child in a cold night can do almost none of these things. It can only signal distress, press toward warmth if warmth is near, and depend on others to understand what the body cannot explain. This is why cold made human dependence visible long before people had words for biology. The human body begins life unfinished in many ways. It must be carried. It must be fed. It must be protected from animals, weather, infection, injury, and distance. But cold adds a special kind of helplessness, because it works even when nothing else appears to be happening. A baby can be safe from predators, close to food, and inside a shelter, yet still lose warmth if the night air reaches it, if the ground beneath it is damp, if the covering around it slips, or if the adult holding it grows too tired to notice the change. Before blankets, this meant that survival depended on attention moving from one body to another. Warmth was not simply kept, it was watched. The smallest members of a group could not be treated as passengers through the night. They shaped the whole sleeping arrangement. If a baby needed the center, then adults had to place themselves around it. If a child needed a drier layer beneath the body, then someone had to gather or preserve that material. If smoke drifted toward the safest warm place, then someone had to shift the fire, the child, or the bedding. If the night grew colder near dawn, then the group's earlier decisions were tested at the moment when everyone was most tired. This dependence was not a weakness separate from human evolution. It was part of what humans became. Our species survived not because every individual was complete alone, but because incomplete bodies were held inside groups long enough to grow. Near the beginning of human life, cold nights would have made this truth practical. A newborn could not wait for better weather. A young child could not wait for culture to become advanced. The group had to create warmth with whatever existed: skin, arms, breath, dry leaves, animal hide, embers, stone shelter, and the remembered knowledge of where the wind would come from. The cold also taught that care is not only emotion. Care can be a technical act. To place a child away from damp ground is care. To keep a hide dry for night use is care. To wake when embers fade is care. To give the warmer center to the weakest body is care. These actions may look simple, but they require awareness of cause and effect. They require people to understand that one body's survival can depend on another person's small decision made hours earlier. This is the deep connection between cold and human society. The night did not merely gather people together. It made them responsible for one another's body temperature. It turned warmth into a shared task. For older people, injured adults, or those weakened by hunger, the same truth applied in another form. A person who had once slept at the edge might later need the center. A strong hunter could become a shivering patient after injury. A mother protecting a child might also need others to protect her. The group had to recognize that vulnerability moves through life. It is not owned only by babies. It appears with illness, age, exhaustion, pregnancy, grief, and hunger. Before blankets, the cold night may have made these changes harder to ignore because the body showed them directly. Someone who could not stay warm alone needed help, and that need could not always wait until morning. In this way, cold exposed the oldest human truth. None of us begins life as an independent creature, and few of us remain independent all the way through. The warmth that carried ancient humans through the dark was not only heat from fire or insulation from hides, it was the willingness of a group to notice whose warmth was failing first. Long before comfort became private, survival was shared through the fragile warmth of dependent bodies. To survive a cold night is one thing. To bring the next generation through it is something deeper. For ancient humans, the night did not end when adults managed to keep themselves warm enough. The real test was whether children could wake, with enough strength, to continue growing, feeding, learning, and moving with the group. A single adult might endure a poor sleeping place, a fading fire, or a thin layer beneath the body. A child had less room for error. Its body was smaller, its reserves were lower, and its ability to solve the problem for itself was almost absent. Before blankets, every cold night asked the same quiet question of a human group: can the warmth of today protect the people who will carry tomorrow? This is why cold survival was never only about individual toughness. It was about continuity. A group that kept its children warm was not simply reducing discomfort. It was protecting memory, language, skill, and future labor before those things had fully formed. The child sleeping between adults near a protected fire was not yet a hunter, gatherer, toolmaker, or storyteller. But if that child lived, it could become one. In this way, warmth moved through time. It began as heat inside an adult body, or in embers guarded through the dark, or in dry grass placed beneath small limbs, and it ended as another generation able to stand, walk, remember, and care for others. Near the beginning of human life, this must have been one of the most important meanings of night care. The group did not need to speak about evolution or survival rates. It only needed to know through repeated experience that a cold child was a serious matter. A baby held close during the night, a young child placed away from the cold edge, an older child tucked into the warmer center. All of these choices helped preserve the group's future in the most physical way possible. The cold also taught timing. It was not enough to notice danger only when a child was already shivering badly. Warmth had to be prepared before the deepest cold arrived. Bedding had to be gathered while there was still light. Fuel had to be collected before the group settled. A hide had to be kept dry. The sleeping place had to be chosen with children in mind, not only strong adults. This turned care into foresight. A group protecting its young had to think beyond the present moment. The night ahead had to be imagined before it arrived. That ability to anticipate cold may have shaped human life as much as any dramatic invention. To prepare for the needs of a body that cannot yet prepare for itself is one of the quiet beginnings of culture. It means remembering yesterday's cold and changing tonight's arrangement. It means learning which materials failed, which shelter worked, which position near the fire was safest, and which child needed more warmth than the others. Cold nights also connected generations in another way. Older people, if they survived long enough, may have carried knowledge of places, seasons, materials, and dangers that younger adults had not yet learned. A person whose body was weaker might still remember which shelter stayed dry in cold rain, or how to arrange a fire so embers lasted longer. The vulnerable were not only burdens, they could also be memory keepers. In a world before written records, survival knowledge lived inside people. Keeping children warm protected the future, but keeping elders warm could protect the past. The cold night therefore linked both ends of life. The youngest needed heat to become the future. The oldest needed heat to continue carrying memory. Between them were adults whose strength held the sleeping group together. Before blankets, this was the human answer to cold at its most complete. Not one warm object, not one heroic body, but a chain of care across age, need, and time. To survive the night was to keep that chain from breaking before morning. Leaving a familiar climate is not only a movement across land, it is a movement into new nights. During the day, a group can see the path ahead, search for food, follow water, watch animals, and judge the shape of hills, rivers, forests, and open ground. But when darkness comes, the question changes. The body is no longer asking how far it can travel, it is asking whether it can stop. For ancient humans moving beyond older warm environments, this question became more serious with each unfamiliar season and each cooler place. A landscape that could be crossed in daylight still had to be slept inside at night. That was the hidden cost of expansion. Human groups did not spread across the world as if the body were separate from temperature. They moved as warm-blooded, lightly furred beings whose survival depended on keeping the core warm through rest. A new region might offer animals, plants, stone, water, and shelter, yet still challenge the body after sunset. The air could cool faster than expected. A dry plain could lose heat under a clear sky. A highland could feel generous in sunlight and severe before dawn. A river valley could provide life during the day and cold dampness at night. The journey into new land was also a journey into new patterns of heat loss. Near the beginning of human expansion, this meant that migration was never just about walking forward. It was about learning where a body could safely become still. Each new place asked for a new arrangement. In one region, the main danger might be wind across open ground. In another, dampness beneath the sleeping body. In another, long seasonal darkness or cold air settling into low places. A group could not use one habit everywhere. The sleeping knowledge that worked in a warmer homeland might fail in a cooler valley. A shelter that worked in dry weather might become useless in rain. Firewood might be easy in one landscape and scarce in another. Hides might be available when animals were hunted, but not always in the same quantity or condition. Dry bedding could be abundant in one season and difficult to find in another. This is why the spread of ancient humans required flexible intelligence. The body remained human, but the night kept changing its rules. To move into colder or more variable regions, people had to carry more than tools. They had to carry memory, caution, and the ability to adjust. They had to notice the direction of wind before lying down. They had to understand that cold air could settle in hollows. They had to protect embers from rain and choose sleeping places where children would not cool too quickly. They had to use rock, grass, hide, fire, and body warmth in different combinations depending on what the land allowed. There was no universal blanket following them through every climate. Warmth had to be rebuilt from local materials again and again. This makes ancient migration feel less like a simple map of movement and more like a long series of nights survived one by one. A group could reach a new valley, but if the nights broke sleep too often, weakened children, drained adults, or made fire difficult to keep, that place might become harder to remain in. Another place, not richer in food but better sheltered from night cold, might become more useful than it first appeared. The human story is often told through distance, but distance only matters if people can recover along the way. Walking, hunting, gathering, carrying, and remembering all depend on sleep. And sleep depends on the body not losing too much warmth while it is defenseless. Before blankets, every movement into cooler land carried this quiet question beneath it. Where will the group sleep when the light is gone? Wind, season, height, and frost changed the rules of sleep. A group moving into cooler country did not meet cold as one simple force. It came in different forms, and each form asked for a different answer. Wind could make a mild night feel harsh by stripping away the thin warmth that gathered near skin, hide, and bedding. Season could turn a familiar place into a different world, where the same shelter that worked in one month failed in another. Height could cool the air even when the land below remained warmer. Frost could arrive quietly before dawn, after the fire had weakened and after bodies had been still for many hours. Before blankets, these differences mattered because ancient humans had to match their sleeping habits to the kind of cold around them. A body that could rest safely behind a rock in dry wind might struggle in a damp valley. A group that could sleep well near a small fire in autumn might need more fuel, thicker bedding, and closer bodies in winter. The human body remained the same, but the environment kept changing its demands. Near the beginning of human expansion, this would have made survival a matter of careful adjustment, not simple endurance. Wind was often the first enemy of warmth because it attacked the small layer of warm air near the body. A hide, a pile of grass, or a group of sleeping people works partly by keeping air still. When wind moves freely, it takes that stillness away. This made the shape of land important. The protected side of a boulder, the inner curve of a hollow, the edge of a forest, or the lee side of a slope could change the night without adding any new material. A place did not need to be truly warm to be better. It only needed to let warmth leave more slowly. Season changed the problem in a broader way. A place with enough dry grass in one season might become wet and useless in another. Firewood might be easy to gather when branches were dry, but difficult after rain or snow. Animal hides might be more available after successful hunting, but still needed work to become useful. A sleeping place remembered from a warmer month might become dangerous when colder air settled into it later. Ancient humans had to learn that the land was not one fixed shelter. It had moods across the year. To survive, they needed seasonal memory, where cold gathered, where water stayed, where fuel remained dry, where shelter lasted when the weather changed. Height added another lesson. In high places, air can grow colder, wind can become stronger, and nights can change quickly. Yet high ground might also offer visibility, dryness, or distance from damp low areas. Low ground could be sheltered, but cold air may settle there and moisture may collect. The best place was not always obvious. It depended on the balance between wind, dampness, fire, safety, and the bodies present in the group. Frost made these decisions even sharper. Frost is quiet. It does not need a storm. It can form when the night is clear and surfaces lose heat. For a sleeping human body without blankets, frost meant that the world itself had cooled enough to touch skin, bedding, hides, and fuel with a new severity. Dry materials had to be protected. Children had to be placed where warmth overlapped. Embers had to last longer. Bodies had to gather closer. This was not a dramatic battle against ice. It was a slow negotiation with the last hours before dawn. In these changing conditions, ancient humans survived because they did not rely on one answer. They read the wind, remembered the season, respected height, watched moisture, guarded fire, and arranged bodies according to need. Cold taught them that every landscape had its own night. Every colder region taught humans a slightly different way to sleep. There was no single ancient method that worked everywhere, because cold itself changed with land, season, moisture, wind, and available materials. A group resting near a dry grassland did not face the same night as a group near a river valley. People in a rocky upland did not arrange warmth exactly like people at the edge of a forest. A sheltered cave mouth, an open plain, a coastal wind, a high valley, a damp woodland floor, and a frozen morning all created different problems for the same human body. Before blankets, this meant that survival depended on adjustment. The body remained warm-blooded and lightly furred wherever it went, but the sleeping strategy had to change with the place. In one land, the most important answer might be blocking wind. In another, staying dry. In another, finding enough fuel. In another, keeping children away from cold ground. In another, using animal hides because plant bedding was scarce. Ancient humans did not carry a complete solution into each new environment. They carried flexible habits that could be rearranged. This is one of the quiet strengths of our species. Humans did not survive cold nights because they became perfectly adapted to one climate. They survived because they could notice difference. They could learn that a hollow was too damp, that a ridge was too windy, that a forest edge kept calmer air, that stone could protect from rain but steal warmth from below, that old ash marked a place where fire had changed the ground, that dry grass gathered before sunset could matter more than strength after midnight. Near the beginning of human expansion, every new sleeping place was a test of this attention. A group could not simply lie down anywhere and hope the body would endure. The land had to be read before the body became still. In cold regions, sleep may have become more deliberate. People had to think about where the fire would sit, where smoke would move, where fuel could be stored, where bedding could remain dry, where children and weaker bodies would lie, and how close the group should gather as the night deepened. These choices were not fixed formulas. They shifted with the weather. A place that was good in dry cold might be poor in wet cold. A fire that worked in a calm hollow might become dangerous in a smoky shelter. A hide that protected against wind might need drying before it could help during sleep. A bed of leaves might be useful in one forest and useless where moisture gathered. The human answer to cold was therefore not a finished object, but a changing pattern. It was remade each evening from the materials and knowledge at hand. This kind of adjustment also shaped memory. A group that survived many nights in a region slowly built a mental map of warmth. Not just where food might be found, but where bodies could recover. Not just where water flowed, but where dampness made sleep colder. Not just where animals moved, but where firewood stayed dry and wind weakened after sunset. The sleeping landscape became part of the remembered landscape. This matters because migration is often imagined as movement across space, but ancient movement also required repeated success at stopping. If people could not sleep, recover, and protect children, they could not keep moving for long. Every new land had to become sleepable before it could become livable. Before blankets, that was the hidden challenge of human expansion into colder worlds. The body could enter a place in daylight, but the group had to learn how to belong to it at night. Cold forced humans to adjust not only their tools and shelters, but their sense of place itself. A land was not truly known until people understood how to keep warmth there until morning. To say that ancient humans had no blankets is not the same as saying they had no wisdom. It only means their warmth was not stored in the soft, familiar form many people know now. A modern blanket hides the older problem because it works so quietly. You pull it over the body, and a private layer of warmth begins to gather. The room can be silent. The bed can be separate. The night can feel as if it belongs to one person alone. But in the ancient world, warmth rarely worked in such a simple way. It had to be made through many small decisions before sleep could safely arrive. A place had to be chosen. The ground had to be judged. Fuel had to be gathered or protected. Dry material had to be placed beneath the body. A fire had to be kept alive when possible. Children had to be brought close. Hides, grasses, leaves, bark, and shelter had to be used in ways that slowed the escape of heat. None of these answers was perfect, but together they formed a quiet intelligence. Before blankets, humans did not sleep inside comfort. They slept inside arrangements. That difference matters. It reminds us that survival was not built from one heroic invention, but from layered attention. A person who knew where cold air settled in a valley was using knowledge. A person who kept dry bedding away from damp ground was using knowledge. A person who placed a baby between warmer bodies was using knowledge. A person who remembered that one rock shelter smoked badly and another held warmth better was using knowledge. These acts may look ordinary because they leave little behind. They do not always become famous objects in museums. They may not remain like stone tools or bones. Yet they belong to the same human capacity that shaped our species, the ability to notice a problem, remember its pattern, and change the world just enough for life to continue. Near the beginning of human history, this kind of knowledge was probably carried in practice. It was passed through watching, helping, sleeping, waking, feeling cold, and trying again the next night. A child did not need a formal lesson to learn that the center of the sleeping group was warmer than the edge. An adult did not need written science to know that wet grass failed the body. A group did not need a word for insulation to understand that dry, loose material beneath the hips and shoulders could make dawn easier to reach. Ancient wisdom was often physical before it became verbal. It lived in hands gathering bedding, feet choosing higher dry ground, eyes judging smoke, and bodies shifting closer when the cold deepened. This is why the absence of blankets should not be imagined as emptiness. It was not a blank space in human life. It was filled by other forms of warmth, social warmth, fire warmth, ground knowledge, shelter memory, material skill, and care for vulnerable bodies. The modern blanket compresses many of these old solutions into one object. It gives each person a private layer that once required landscape, labor, and cooperation. But the older system was not foolish, simply because it was rough. It was adapted to a world where people used what could be found, carried, repaired, shared, and renewed. A hide did not need to look like a blanket to help. A pile of dry leaves did not need to be soft to matter. A circle of bodies did not need to be comfortable to protect a child. The value was measured by whether warmth lasted long enough for sleep, and whether sleep lasted long enough for morning. So when we ask how ancient humans survived cold nights before blankets, the first honest answer is not that they had one hidden substitute. They had many imperfect answers working together. Their intelligence was not in escaping the cold completely, but in slowing its reach, sharing its burden, and learning how to meet the night with more than bare skin. Surviving a cold night was not a private achievement, it was a collective one. A single person might endure for a while by curling inward, shivering, or lying close to embers, but the longer human answer was larger than one body. It involved people arranging themselves, protecting one another, and turning a dangerous night into something the group could pass through together. Before blankets, warmth had to be shared because no single answer was reliable enough alone. Fire could fade. Bedding could become damp. A hide could slip away. A shelter could block wind from one direction while leaving another side exposed. The ground could continue to pull heat downward even when the air felt calm. But when all these imperfect answers were brought together, they could become strong enough. A dry layer beneath the body, a careful place out of the wind, a small fire kept alive, an animal skin held close, and other bodies gathered nearby could turn exposure into rest. This is why ancient warmth should be understood as a system of cooperation. The group itself was part of the shelter. Some people could gather fuel before dark. Some could remember where dry grasses grew. Some could help prepare hides or bedding. Some could hold children close. Some could wake when fire weakened. Some could notice when an older person or injured adult needed a warmer place. These acts were not separate from survival. They were survival. Near the beginning of human life, the night would have shown this clearly. A body alone had limits, but a group could distribute effort. The strongest did not need to use every warm place for themselves. The most vulnerable did not need to face the edge alone. Warmth could be placed where it mattered most. Children could sleep near the center. Adults could shield them from wind. Those who knew the land could guide the group toward better shelter. Those who had gathered material during daylight could make the night less severe for everyone. This made warmth more than a physical condition. It became a moral and practical arrangement. The cold asked people to decide, again and again, whose body needed protection first. It asked whether knowledge would be shared, whether fuel would be saved, whether dry bedding would be kept for the weakest, whether the center of the group would be used wisely. In this way, cold nights may have helped deepen the human habit of mutual dependence, not because ancient people were ideal, peaceful, or free from conflict, but because the environment made isolation costly. A group that failed to cooperate lost heat in every direction. A group that cooperated could hold a little warmth inside a much larger cold. This collective survival also carried knowledge across generations. A child warmed by adults could later become the adult who remembered how to warm another child. A young person who watched elders choose shelter could one day choose shelter for others. A mistake made in one cold place could become a lesson carried into the next season. The ancient answer to cold was therefore not only heat, it was memory. It was repeated practice. It was the slow accumulation of small corrections. Sleep farther from damp ground, turn the fire away from strong wind, keep the hide dry, place the smallest body nearer to warmth. Do not trust a hollow simply because it blocks sight. Do not let embers die too early. None of these lessons needed to be grand. Together, they made life possible. Long before blankets gave one person a private pocket of comfort, cold nights taught humans to build warmth between people, materials, fire, and place. The achievement was not that ancient humans conquered the cold. The achievement was that they learned to survive it without being alone. Tonight, a blanket may rest over the body so quietly that it feels almost separate from history. It asks for nothing. It does not need fuel, memory, shelter, cooperation, or watchfulness. It simply lies there, holding a thin layer of warmth close to the skin, but the body beneath it is much older than the blanket. It still tightens when cold air enters the room. It still curls slightly when warmth begins to leave. It still brings the hands toward the chest, draws the knees closer, and searches for a smaller shape in the dark. These small movements are not modern habits. They are traces of an older body, a body that once had to meet the night without woven comfort. When a person wakes cold today, even inside a safe house, the feeling can seem unreasonable. There may be walls, a roof, a bed, and a soft covering nearby. Yet the body reacts as if something important is being lost. In one sense, it is right. Warmth is life held in a narrow range. The human body cannot ignore its loss, because for most of our beginning, cold was not just discomfort. It was a quiet test of whether the body could rest, whether children could keep growing, whether elders could keep remembering, whether the group could reach morning with enough strength to continue. Long before blankets, warmth was made from relationships. Skin related to air, bodies related to other bodies, fire related to fuel, shelter related to wind, bedding related to ground, memory related to season, care related to weakness. Nothing existed alone. A hide was useful only if it stayed dry. A fire was useful only if it lived long enough. A cave was useful only if smoke, dampness, and stone did not turn it against the sleepers. A group was useful only if its warmth reached the bodies that needed it most. This is the lesson hidden inside the cold night. Survival did not come from one object, but from a careful arrangement of many fragile things. That lesson still has value now, even in a world of blankets, heaters, houses, and beds. It reminds us that comfort is not always simple just because it has become easy to use. Behind one soft covering lies a very long history of observation, labor, sharing, and care. The warmth that now feels private was once collective. The sleep that now feels personal was once shaped by the ground beneath many bodies, the fire between them, and the knowledge carried from older nights. Ancient humans survived cold nights before blankets because they learned to slow the loss of warmth in every way they could. They chose better places. They lifted the body from damp earth. They used skins, grasses, leaves, bark, stone, smoke, embers, and the nearness of others. They protected the smallest and weakest bodies because the future of the group depended on them. They remembered what worked and what failed and carried those memories into the next night. There is no need to make this story larger than the evidence allows. We do not need to imagine perfect shelters, perfect fires, or perfect wisdom. The truth is quieter, and perhaps more human. They survived because enough small answers came together often enough. Not always, not everywhere, not without loss, but often enough for the chain of human life to continue until it reached us. So when you pull warmth over your body now, you are not only using a modern object, you are resting inside the final shape of an ancient question, one asked by skin, wind, ground, fire, and people in the dark. And somewhere beneath that ordinary comfort, the body may still remember the first nights when warmth was never owned alone, but borrowed, guarded, and shared until morning. If such a simple feeling carries so much forgotten history, what else does the sleeping body still remember from the long beginning of being human?